Hey, and welcome back to the Demystifying Design series. And this one, we're actually going to be taking a different approach. In the last one, we did quite an involved user settings page. But actually, this time we're going to redesign the MyFitnessPal diary, which I use regularly. I think this is a much smaller, more contained experience. So I'll be able to keep the video down to a much shorter length, and I'll be able to put some more insights in there. Now, I think this is actually not that bad. I've got it up on the screen here. It's really not that bad, but there's a couple things I want to change, and I just want to show you how you can still polish an experience if it's already pretty good, and what we can do to make things visually more clear inside an application like this. So strap yourself in, let's get going. Alright, so here you can see the old iteration that I was working on. Really didn't like that, so went ahead and deleted it all, and we'll start again with the header here. The header is actually quite similar to the current header from MyFitnessPal. I just made a couple small changes to the aesthetic appearance of it. And I also wanted to, in the header on the app, they actually had two icons over to the right. And I moved them elsewhere on the experience and included an account menu up here. Because I noticed that one thing that the app had that was kind of confusing was there was two separate navigations. There was the main navigation, which you'd get to by clicking diary, and then there was this bottom navigation with home, diary, and me with your profile. So instead of having those two confusing navigation experiences, I just figured, okay, there's probably some kind of account system behind the scenes, and they'll want to use that, and they want the main navigation experience. So I'll just put that in the header and move the little smaller actions elsewhere into the experience. It took me quite a while to get the timeline header sorted, as you can see here, but one of the things I did that I think is going to have a pretty positive impact on the user experience was I moved the day switcher controls over to the right. In the current app, there's two buttons, one on the right of the screen, one on the left. So if you want to make quick navigations between multiple days, you have to move your thumb quite a bit. Since most people are right-handed, I figured let's just put them on the right here. I actually got this from Calendly, as you can see on the screen here, but in retrospect, well, not in retrospect, but I think in implementation, you'd have to implement a left-handed alternative in a settings page somewhere for people that don't want to have to reach all the way across the screen to use this. Moving on to the body now, I opted to use a subtle gray as the background color just so I could have some kind of separation from the header and indicate that the content in the body was what's being represented by the current day in the diary. So that subtle color change is something you can use in your designs as well. Also, the very first thing, one of the main problems I saw with the experience, like I said, it's a pretty good experience, but the diary kind of lacked in showing you exactly how many calories were remaining. So I wanted to make that a focus for the redesign here. Right now, well, as you'll see in the final experience, the first thing your eyes go to is that big number, and then there's a nice visual colored representation of your caloric intake for the day, your progress throughout the day, in the progress bar below. Moving on to the sections that represent each part of the day or each potential way where a user can alter their caloric intake or any exercise where they would have extra calories to burn. I wanted to, I basically copied this almost exactly from the current experience because I thought it was actually quite nice. It was a nice, clean, tabular representation of the data. I just tidied it up a little bit, added some space around the key elements so you could control the way that the user's eye moves through the page. And this is something that you can do when you're designing something. Just sometimes you don't need to use lines or tables or anything. You just need to line things up. And then the visual hierarchy is very clear to people when they look at it, and you'll see what I mean when I'm done here. Everything's organized in a neat column. It's very clear that they're separate, but there's not very many separating lines, except of course the 3 on the section titles. For this project, I'm actually using a icon library called Bold Icons. I'm going to link to it in the description of the video here. But generally, you want to steer clear of Font Awesome whenever you can. It just feels really generic. There's a lot of really fantastic iconography out there that you can buy. It's usually like $100 for a package, but it really has a profoundly positive impact on the resulting aesthetic of your designs. As you can tell, I do appear kind of frustrated in the camera down on the lower right, and what you're seeing me here now is plugging in my phone and running the experience live on my phone so I can see what it looks like in the most real context possible. And here's where I discovered that foolishly my font was way too small, the font size. I don't know why I picked such a small font to start out with. This was a big mistake, but just goes to show you, like, there's no alternative to getting your designs on a physical device and just looking at them there, because it will become very apparent to you very quickly that there's something wrong if you can look at it in context here. And as we're coming to a close on the body content here, you'll start to see what I was alluding to earlier, right? The sections and all the content within them, just because of how they're positioned, it's clear what every item represents, what every number represents. The sections are clear. The hierarchy is very visually logical. Right, so just by looking at this, you can see what each section represents and what to do to interact with it. Again, a lot of this is very similar to how it was done originally, it's just polished up a bit. Moving on to the action menu here, I'm actually a regular user of the MyFitnessPal food diary here, and as it should come as no surprise to you, one of the most common things you do when you're using the app is adding new food, new exercise, and new water. So given that it's such an important part of the application, I figured it should have its own dedicated experience, kind of a quick menu that would just make that common task very easy for users. So I made a little menu here that pops out, very material-like, inspired by the material design suite, that's going to persistently stick to the lower right, easy for thumbs to reach, and then it would expand to allow users to add food, water, exercise on the fly if they need to. Initially, I wanted to make this icon red, but then it felt like you were doing something wrong, a little too much. You know, I didn't want to imply that anything was being deleted, so I just changed it to a dark black to indicate that it was close but not delete. So again, using these icons here to represent the item that you're adding here. Always got to be careful with iconography like this because it's not very accessible, and if your icon doesn't meet the intent very well, it can be very confusing. But I think in this case, given that there's a lot of affordance that you're using a food diary, the icons can be used properly here. Here I was actually going to add an extra spot to add notes to the day, but then I realized retrospectively that people are going to want to edit notes as well. It's not necessarily something you want to just quickly add, and it should kind of have its own little dedicated space. So I just added another extra action icon up next to the nutrients option button that allows people to access the notes panel where they can then control their own notes. I alluded to this in the last video. Whenever there's an experience that's very custom, it's typically useful to create that in its own unique little space. And now I'm just wiring everything together in the prototype pane. Something that I really like to use in Adobe XD is the auto animate feature, and if you build the design in a very specific way using all the same elements but just change their attributes, you can have Adobe XD just animate between all of them, and it looks really nice, and you'll get to see that in a minute. And there we go. So as you can see, here's the old experience. It's really, like I said, not that bad. There's not much wrong with it, but there's usually always room for improvement in design, especially in these large corporate projects where things maybe fall through the cracks a little bit. But in this new experience, everything's much more visually clear, and as soon as you look at this, you know exactly how many calories you have left in your day, and there's a whole bunch of other information that just pops out to you that's relevant to someone that uses this on a regular basis. But that's it for this one. Again, let me know in the comments if you have any feedback for me, anything you'd like me to change about how we're going through the series here, and most importantly, if you have any bad designs that you want me to refactor on the show here, just leave them in a comment and I'll get them addressed there. But thanks for your time, folks. Have a wonderful day, and keep designing.